on today's StoryBeat.
It used to be when I started writing films, you used to have 10 minutes in which to grab them. And now I'm told the last couple times I went to pitch meetings, you got like less than 5 minutes to grab them.
You've got to you've got to grab them on page 1, 2, 3, or you're in trouble.
Or you lose them. Yeah, and we see that now. You see that on they've codified that with cold openings on television.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, the brilliant playwright and screenwriter, Martin Casella, has seen his work produced across the United States and around the world. His plays include The Report, Black Tom Island, The Irish Curse, Directions for Restoring the Apparently Dead, Desert Fire, Beautiful Dreamer, George Bush Goes to Hell, Paper Moon the Musical, and many others. For film and television, Marty has written for Steven Spielberg, Lasse Hallström, Kerry Washington, Whoopi Goldberg, Disney, Universal, Warner Brothers, ABC, CBS, and HBO. As an actor, you may remember Marty's memorable turn in the movie Poltergeist. He played a parapsychologist aptly named Marty, who unforgettably tears his own face apart. Marty has also appeared in RoboCop 2, 6 Weeks, and Amazon Women on the Moon. For the record, Marty and I have known one another for more years than either of us will own up to, having met on the set of a play called Strider, which was directed by Marty's brother, Matt, and for which I designed the lighting. For all those reasons and so many more, it's my great pleasure to have one of the very best playwrights working in today's theater, my friend Martin Casella, join me today on StoryBeat. Marty, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Steve. And may I return the compliment by saying your lighting on Strider was probably the best lit show I've ever had any association with. I was actually one of the producers on that. So it was spectacular. And I used to sit in the back of the theater every night just to see the lighting sometimes.
Oh, well, aren't you beyond kind? I think we also did some nice work on In Trousers as well, which was a year later. That was also a pretty good show. How did you become inspired in the first place to write plays? How far back did this go?
It goes back very far. When I was a kid, like 8, 9, 10, I lived very close to the local library. I grew up here in Los Angeles in a town called Sun Valley. And the library was very close by. And I'm one of those kids that sort of escaped into books. And I was the guy at the family dinners who was always in the other room reading a book. And there was a contest at a local library, and I wrote a couple poems and I entered it and I won a bunch of awards. And then I was obsessed with F. Scott Fitzgerald when I was probably 12 or 13. And so I sat down one day and thought, I'm going to write a play about F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda Fitzgerald. And in each of the scenes is going to be set at a different place on their adventures. And I had such a good time doing that. I had a great time doing the research. I think I was probably all of 14 or 15.
Wow.
And then, like, I don't know what happened. The house got cleaned up one day or something, and the play vanished forever. I could not find it. I tore the place apart. I looked in the garage, but that's when it got me. And the very first play I ever saw in my life, a buddy and his family took me to the Mark Taper Forum in Los Angeles to see the trial of the Catonsville Nine. And I was, even at the age of 12 or 13, I was, little baby liberal and against the Vietnam War. And that play just destroyed me. I was like a mess when it was over. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to tell stories like that.
Had you done a little bit of theater in school prior to that, or was this your first foray?
Yes, I had done some plays in junior high school and had a really good time.
So it got into your bloodstream a little bit
Yeah.
at that point.
Yeah.
And then when you started to write, the bug really stunk in.
Really, really got me. And in high school, I was, all of us who were like, we call them theater kids. I was, did three different musicals in high school, and then while I was in high school, I got involved doing shows. And they had an incredible summer program here in the San Fernando Valley when I was a kid, and all the best high school drama students would audition for one production every year. So I did that for 2 years in a row with famous people that went on to do television and won awards. And we did Damn Yankees one year, and the next year we did West Side Story.
Wow.
And
so there was a lot of talent in the Valley at that time.
Oh yeah, it was incredible. When you go to these auditions, you just see all the people. I mean, growing up in the Valley, there were certain schools that it was like Taft, and I'm trying to think of the other one, like Woodland Hills, and Beverly Hills High School and Hollywood High. And those kids they were just amazing. They won all the awards, at the high school drama festivals.
I imagine some of them were the children of people who were already in the business.
Yes, many of them were. Yes,
and so they already had a little bit of show business pushed on them from an early age.
Yeah. And I, on the other hand, came from a family, my dad, my stepmother, and then in a later generation, all of my siblings, my uncles, everybody, we all worked in the film industry in Los Angeles. We were part of that industry town thing. And my dad, when I was a kid, used to say, "No son of mine is going to be in a movie, blah, 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 blah," which later on made him laugh a great deal when I was in Poltergeist. But yeah, he when I was a kid, one of the family stories was that my dad came home he worked at 20th Century Fox during the late 60s and early 70s. And he came home one day and said, "Oh, we're shooting a big giant movie there." And I was in junior high, and it needs a big crowd scene. And they told all the employees to like bring their families this Saturday to the studio, and they were going to shoot all this stuff over Saturday and Sunday. And I told them, none of my kids are going to do that crap. And later on, I was heartbroken when I found out that the movie was Barbra Streisand's version of Hello, Dolly.
Oh.
And it was the giant parade scene, and all of the children and family members of the Fox people. They needed so many people. There weren't enough extras in Hollywood. So and I miss getting to do that.
And on top of it, you would have been directed by Gene Kelly.
By Gene Kelly, I know. He would have been there with his giant megaphone shouting at the thousands of people that were lining that amazing set at the old 20th Century Fox.
And that set was there for a really long time.
Years and years and years. I mean, after I would go visit my dad years after that, or when I was starting to be a writer and I would have pitch meetings at Fox. Even in the 80s, you could go there and that set was still there. It was spectacular. For anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about, that it's a version of New York from I think it's supposed to be 1901 or something.
Something like that.
Yeah. And it was blocks long with elevated trains and like tens of stores and restaurants, and
you could actually see it, I think, from Olympic or Pico or wherever it was.
You could look through the gate, the 20th Century Fox drive-in gate, and you could see this huge set.
It was spectacular. Well, it's gone now, but it's
gone. Yeah,
spectacular.
It's gone now,
it was. All right, so you're now in your teens, and you've gotten a bug into you about being a writer. Or at least being involved in theater or film or whatever it was that was starting to percolate in your mind. Did you train somewhere? Did you get training from somewhere?
I wanted to be an actor. That's mostly what I wanted to do. I would sort of write stories and things on the side. I went to Cal Arts out in Valencia, California Institute of the Arts, in the theater school. And while I was there, I took some writing classes. We were allowed, it's not like any other university. There's like 5 schools and they all have to do with the arts. And then there's a 6th school that just sort of, you could go and actually learn things like, that had to do with writing, that had to do with the arts and outside of your own field. And I loved doing that. I loved the theater classes, but I loved going to those outside classes where we studied all these famous American artists like Charles Ives and it was Mary Cassatt. It was amazing. And so I would work on writing little things. And when I graduated though, I got really burned out from I'd done theater at that point for 4 years of college, 3 in high school, 3 in junior high. And the last year of college for assortment of reasons was kind of unpleasant. And I didn't want to do anything like that anymore. And when I graduated from college, my dad said, well, do you want to come work for me? I'm working on a studio movie, a big movie. I need someone to run my transportation office. You're just going to have to make phone calls, but you do have to be at work every morning at 6. So I would get to work at 6 a.m. and it would be deserted for 3 hours. Like a couple Teamsters would wander through or something, somebody would bring donuts in from the studio. We weren't on the lot. We were a block away from the Warner Brothers lot. And,
Right.
And so I would get bored because I just had to sit there and wait for phone calls. So I started writing a play there that was based on my experience working on the movie. The movie was Spielberg's movie of 1941.
Right.
And which was crazy and incredibly over budget, and had all these crazy stars in it and flying people back and forth to be on Saturday Night Live. And it was a madhouse for months and months and months. And so I would come to work and I would get my little typewriter, that was on my desk. They put me at the front. The rest of the day I was in the back in the transportation room, my dad's big office. But in the morning I was sitting there and I would just I started writing a play about what it was like working on a big giant movie thing like that. And I actually, when it was done, I gave it, Roger Holtzberg and I, a really good buddy of mine that we went together. We went to college together and stayed friends after that. And Roger was directing some theater and some films. And I said, hey, I wrote this play I'd like you to direct. And I worked for Spielberg on and off for not on and off, but basically I worked for my dad for 6 months, and then Spielberg brought me on and I worked on all the miniature work. I worked as an assistant director for several months. And at that point, they asked me to work on Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I got to go to England for 3 months and then Africa.
And were you still writing through this whole period?
I was writing through that period. I would go home late at night and I'd scribble and write things down. And
so as you were actually working hand in hand with Spielberg for quite some time.
Yeah, I was his assistant. Yeah, in the beginning I was a PA, and then there was when we moved on I worked for my dad, and then on the rest of 1941, I was a PA on reshoots and all sorts of things. But when we moved over to Lucasfilm, after that, my dad was like, okay, so long. And actually, before we worked on Lucasfilm, there was another Spielberg produced movie. Spielberg and John Milius produced Robert Zemeckis and Robert Gale's film, Used Cars. And I got to go work on that for 3 months.
Wow.
Steven said, okay, we're not starting for 3 months. So why don't you go be Bob Z's assistant on Used Cars for 3 months? And I was like, great. And we went to Arizona and I spent 3 months there and had a blast, and did everything from working for my dad to the very first day at work. Bob Zemeckis turned to me, and I had known him for a year and a half by then, because he and Bob Gale wrote 1941. So we were friends, and we're not the same age, but pretty close. And I remember the first day at work, and he knew I'd been working for Steven all that time. And he turned to me and he very shyly said, the very first morning at like 6 a.m. of work, he goes, do you mind if I ask you to get a cup of coffee? I burst out laughing at that point, going, look, after what I've done for Steven over the last year and a half. And during that time, I'd lived in London, and we were in Africa. And I was, I always used to say, I never had to do anything illegal working for Steven. There was lots of other crazy stuff, but I never had to get drugs or women or any kind of stuff like that. Steven's an amazing human being and one of the best people I know. And all my other friends who were PAs were like, oh my God, I had to buy drugs on a corner in Santa Monica. And I'm like, yeah, we don't do that where I work. So,
you didn't get any formal training as a writer. You're self-taught.
None. I'm self-taught. I picked it up. I worked a lot with, I was there in the room when Zemeckis and Gale were doing rewrites on not only on 1941, but on Used Cars. And also while we were doing Used Cars, before we started Used Cars, they had written a script. I can't remember if the title was the same, but later on it turned out to be Back to the Future.
Oh, just that little thing.
Just that little thing. And there's a little in story here, which I can confirm it's a real thing. Bob Gale finally told the public about 3 years ago at a talkback he did. One day we were working on the casting of 1940 around Used Cars, and Gail came to me and he said, we're doing a rewrite. You know that script we let you read? I said, oh yeah, it was great. That was when a nuclear explosion was going to send the car into the future or something. And they said, we don't like our character's name in the script. We want to use your name. Are you okay with that? And I said, am I okay with that? Yeah, absolutely. So, in 1985, when the movie finally came out and I saw it for the first time, I'm like, Marty McFly.
I didn't know that story.
Yes. Yeah. I never talked about it a lot because I felt like I would end up being like Zelig or something, but Bob finally made that public a couple years ago. And it was actually, he didn't use my name. Well, let's just say when the LA Times wrote the article about that talk back, they didn't use my name, but Bob did. Bob said, oh, our production assistant's name was Marty. And so we use that. So
that's amazing.
So I had all this amazing training, and I'd started writing plays during those mornings back on 1941. And I ended up writing 2 more plays during that period when I stopped working for Spielberg, I got together with a bunch of people that went to Cal Arts, and I said, let's start a theater company. I'd written 2 plays, almost 3 at that point, and Roger was a part of it, Roger Holzberg.
Roger, by the way, was the set designer of Strider.
Yes. And a couple of my other plays, Beautiful Dreamer and also Under Another Name, he did the set design for my play Mates. So, and I think he also did my play, Pater, which is the one that's based on 1941.
Right.
So, and I had written a play about a husband and wife, a British husband and wife, after spending all those months in London. And I'd always have a good ear for accents and things. So I kind of lived in this cool basement apartment that I shared with Kathleen Kennedy, who was Stephen's assistant at the time. Kathy was his associate. I was his assistant. And I wrote a play.
She now more or less runs Lucasfilm.
Runs Lucasfilm, yes, and yes, and oversees all the Star Wars stuff, and she's great. And she also, I must say, I believe Kathy holds the distinction of being the woman with the most Best Oscar nominations. And,
is that right?
Yeah, Academy nominations. Yeah, and has the best taste. Kathy just has the best taste, and her husband Frank Marshall. They're wonderful people, and they've helped me several times during my career with things, and so is Stephen. They're just, they're wonderful people. And anyway, I went to Roger and I said, oh, I've written this play about this British couple, and he goes, I'm too busy. So I went to one of the people I knew from Cal Arts, and she was a director, and I said, I've written this play about an English couple and a British couple who switch houses for the summer, and it all takes place in real time in 2 hours in the British couple's apartment in New York or in London. And she said, oh, let me read it. And she loved it. So we cast it all from people that we knew from Cal Arts. And we got our equity license, I guess you'd call it, equity approval. And I taught at a high school in Santa Monica for a year in exchange for they let us use their black box theater for 1 summer. And we did the play, and we got really lucky. And on opening night, a critic from the LA Times came, and as he left the theater, he grabbed one of our people that was also a Cal Artian named Dee Dee Donahue, who's another old friend. And he grabbed her and he said, could I send some photographers back tomorrow night to take some pictures before your second performance? And by the way, you guys need to put extra people on your phone lines on Friday. And that was on Wednesday night when we opened. And so when Friday came, and I'd never had anything really produced before or done like that, and just loved the theater like more than anything, except maybe movies. And on Friday morning, we all drove over like mad people to the LA Times printing place where you could go and get a newspaper at like 5:30 in the morning or 5 o'clock. And our review of our play was above the fold in the LA Times.
Wow.
And with 2 huge did they have black and white or color back then? I can't remember.
It's probably black and white back then.
Yeah, 2 huge photographs. And we sold out the show for the 6-week run in less than a half an hour.
Wow.
So that's what made my writing career. I won several awards for that play. And it's kind of amazing. And
so explain to me how you're working on movies. You've been working for Spielberg, you know these folks, but you're writing for the theater. Why is that?
Well, this is going to sound a little snobby, but it's not. I mean, they teach this in the couple writing classes that I did have at CalArts. A wonderful guy named Michael Lassalle, who was one of my favorite teachers ever, and he lives in New York now. And he's a poet and a theater critic and a writer. He's wonderful, and he's the one who taught me that movies are about images and action, and plays are about people and ideas. And as much as I love movies, and I do, like beyond belief, I love that use of theater. I love live people. I love how the audience reacts. I love hearing not just laughs. It's not just laughs. I'm a big fan of the silences and the gasps, and even unwanted responses shows you that you've gotten to someone. In my play Mates, that was the first play about the house switch. There's for what the time in 1981 was a very interesting subplot, which was the British husband was bisexual, and the play's about how his male lover comes back to try to win him back before he goes off to spend the summer in America. And the play's funny, but it's also very moving. And you only find out that it's the two guys that used to be lovers. It's set up so that you think it's something else. And when they gave each other a kiss on stage, a woman in the audience jumped up and said, "I knew that's why this was called Mates." And she walked out of the theater. And I remember looking at the director and going, I don't mind. That's fine. Because it got to her. So that's why I wanted to do theater. I could have stayed. They wanted me to work at Spielberg Land and like grew me to be a producer and all that. And I wanted to do theater. And
so your heart was on stage, not on film.
Yeah.
Even though that's what you've been working around.
Yeah.
I think that shows incredible dedication, I guess would be the right word, that you really wanted to do that, even though you were in the middle of the other.
Yeah. And my dad, who worked in the movie industry since he was like 19 or 20 or something like that. He said, "Are you crazy?" There was an adjective I left out before the word crazy. And he just said,
it doesn't start with the letter F, does it?
It does indeed. Yeah. And he yelled at me, and I had worked very, very hard for 3 years, and a very close friend of mine whose husband had also worked for Spielberg and all of those people and the whole thing. And she took me to lunch one day and she said, "I've read your stuff." By that point, she'd read a film script that I'd written, and she'd seen two of my plays. She'd read two of my plays, and she said, "This isn't that you're not meant to be doing this. You're not meant to be running around doing budgets and reading other people's spec scripts." She said, "You look exhausted. You look tired. You need to quit. You need to walk in there on Monday morning and quit."
But the point is you didn't quit for nothing.
I didn't quit
for a purpose. There was a reason to quit.
And I quit, and within a week of quitting, I went and auditioned for a play here in Los Angeles. So I lived in New York for 25 years, so I still have that muscle memory of saying New York. I auditioned for a local sort of equity waiver production of The Lion in Winter, which is a play I had done in high school, and in high school I played Henry the King, but in real life I played the snotty little son John, and I got like an incredible review in the LA Times for my acting, and while I was doing that, we were rehearsing this play that the bunch of us were going to be doing open in the summer, and then out of the blue, to complicate things even more, I got a call from Mike Fenton's office, who's a big Hollywood casting director, and the woman, Marcy Liroff, who used to work with him. And they said, "Oh, we're going to start shooting Poltergeist soon. Stephen brought up the fact that you're acting now in theater, and he kind of wants you to come in and read for us." And I was like, "Oh, that's cool." And so I went in and read for Poltergeist. And there's a million stories about that, but Stephen himself was the one who reached out and told me I got the part, which was incredibly kind of him. And that sums
So,
up.
so you're actually someone who can say that Steven Spielberg called you to say that you got a part.
Well, he did even better, Steve. His office called me the week before they were having the very first screening of Raiders of the Lost Ark at Paramount Studios for the executives. And then 7 or 8 of us who had been there on the team, Kathy and Frank, guy who was one of the producers for Lucasfilm, Howard Kazanjian, George, a couple other people. And I got a phone call asking me, saying, well, you worked on it. You were there with us for 1.5 years. You're invited to this little screening. And I got to the screening. They told me it was at 7, and I got there at 7 at Paramount, and there was nobody there. And then about 5 minutes later, this Porsche Carrera that I immediately recognized, or was it a Spider, immediately came zooming through the parking lot and pulled up. And Steven got out of the car, and I said, what are you doing? Did I make a mistake? There's nobody here. And he said, there's nobody here because the movie's not for 15 more minutes. He said, I just wanted to tell you some good news. You're going to be in a movie. And he
Wow.
did that all on his own. It was phenomenal. It was everything I could do not to just like burst into tears.
Wow.
He had planned that whole thing that way so that he could see me by myself to tell me that he'd cast me in the movie. I must say, he and Toby Hooper had cast me in the movie. So
That's there will be very few people who could ever tell a story like that.
Yeah. And it's one of those defining moments of one's life that one thinks about it. And then to like put the icing on the cake, to use a cliche, I got to go in a private screening room with executives and 7 people I'd spent a year working with, and we got to see Raiders of the Lost Ark for the first time.
For the first time.
And I can't even describe that.
Well, that's one of the most exciting motion pictures ever made.
Ever.
Period.
And huge hit, and just changed popular culture in ways that I don't think we still understand.
I think that's right. And the fact that you not only worked on it, but then got to see it that way, which would be very special. That's remarkable. Has any of that rubbed off on the writing part of your world?
It's really funny. I don't think so. It's rubbed off on my film writing work. How I got into doing that was the next year, and we did another play, which Roger directed that one. That was the play about my experience on working on 1941. He and I were both nervous because it was pretty clear who and what the play was about, we thought. So we used assumed names, despite the fact I had this huge success the year before where won awards, and everybody knew me, and I was doing interviews because my Playmates was such a hit, and it got optioned. It didn't get done in New York, but it was optioned to be done down there. And so we used assumed names to do this play, and then it turned out that wasn't even necessary. We didn't need to have done that because John Milius came and saw that second play. He was the producer. He's also the writer of Apocalypse Now and many great movies like Big Wednesday and Dillinger. And John called the next day, tracked me down at home, and he said, what are you doing? And I said, oh my God, you saw my play last night. He goes, why weren't you there? And I said, I was terrified you were going to get mad. He goes, why would I get mad? It was fantastic. What are you doing in 2 hours for lunch? And I said, nothing. And he said, you're coming to my office at Warner Brothers. I want to hire you to write a movie. And
wow.
I just went, what? And I got there, and I used the word adore very sparsely. I mean, I loved Steven. John, for some reason, I just adored John. John and I could not have dissimilar politics. He's this giant bear of a guy. He's known my dad forever. My dad worked on several of his films, his AIP films, like Dillinger. And so I've known John for a really long time. And John actually, when we were doing 1941, we got a phone call asking if Jane Fonda had won the Oscar for Coming Home. And there was a big to-do about that. And we had gotten a call at the office saying, would Steven like to put his name on a full-page ad that was going to be in the LA Times and the New York Times supporting Jane Fonda's Oscar win? And Steven didn't do politics then. And he said, no, I can't do that. And Kathy turned to me and she said, do you want to do it? And I said, sure, do you want to do it? So Kathy and I had our names in this giant full-page ad, which John Milius saw. And he actually called my dad into his office and said, Casella, you got a problem at home with your kid. And, and my dad said, he's a grown man. If he wants to support Jane Fonda, he can. So anyway,
well,
John,
you left out the part that John Milius is on the conservative end of the political spectrum.
yes, he's on the very conservative end. Yes, our politics could not be more dissimilar. So, John, anyway, John told me to go find a movie that I wanted to write. He said, "What's your favorite film?" Let's start there. He said, because whatever your favorite film is can tell you a lot about you and what you love. And I said, this was 1982. And I said, my favorite movie was Chinatown. It still is. And one of my top 5. And he said, well, go find me a story like Chinatown. So I went to Downtown Museum, the library in LA. And I found the oldest librarian I could find. And I said, tell me the best LA scandal story that most people have never heard of. And she said the Doheny Murder, which had to do with the Teapot Dome scandal. And it's very complicated. I won't go into it. So I tracked it all down and I turned it into a thriller, love story thriller, and very much like Chinatown, only contemporary, set in 1982. And I went into John, and John goes, "That's fantastic. Let's go pitch it." And I had never pitched anything before. And we went right into Alan Ladd Jr. with the Ladd Company, and that's where John's deal was. And I proceeded to tell this story, and it's very complicated, and it took me a half an hour. And they all were like, he had all of his lieutenants there, and it was in the evening, and we did it after work. And he said, Alan Ladd Jr. was like, "This is a really great story. This is all true." Well, I said, "Well, the facts are true. The characters are not." So he said, let us think about it. We walked in the hallway, and John literally threw me against a wall and said, "Are you crazy? That's Alan Ladd Jr., one of the busiest men in Hollywood. You just took a half an hour of his time. That should have taken you 5 minutes." And I said, "John, I've never done this before. I didn't know that." He goes, "Oh my God, kid, what is wrong with you?" And then he just laughed. And then he called me the next morning, and he said, "Well, whatever the hell you did last night," he said, he said, "You impressed Laddie. They're hiring you to write the movie." And I was just like, holy, and I worked on that for a year, and they ended up not making it, but it was this incredible opportunity.
So I definitely want to stop there and make sure the listeners understand what they just heard, which is very important about the business, which is that Marty had an extraordinary opportunity, was with a very well-known A-list writer-director named John Milius into the person that was running 20th Century Fox at the time. It was
Warner Brothers, the Ladd Company at Warner Brothers.
So it was the Ladd Company, Warner Brothers. Okay. Which was a major producer of lots of famous movies.
Chariots of Fire, that just won the Oscar, as a matter of fact.
There you go. And he was given the opportunity to write a feature film for them, and it never got made. Yeah. So I think that's an important factor. It has no reflection on you or the work you did. It's the way the town works.
Steve, I spent the 80s and 90s selling spec scripts, selling pitches, selling pilots. One film got made because somebody really believed in it, and I was able to make a really great living for almost 20 years.
Well, and there's also lessons in there about that, because it always requires one champion. It doesn't require everybody in Hollywood liking you. It requires one person who wants to champion your work.
Exactly. And sometimes there are nefarious reasons why they're championing your work, and sometimes there are perfectly good reasons, like they like your work. And I've had that. And there's also a phrase which the listeners might not be aware of, but in Hollywood, we have a phrase that's called "you sold it in the room." Mm-hmm. And that doesn't happen all the time. Nope, and when it does, and I didn't actually sell it in the room, but I sold it the next morning, which is pretty close to the room. And
you sold it in the room. They just didn't hire you in the room.
And then it was about 10 or 12 years after that, I pitched something at HBO. I'd come up with an idea for an HBO series, a comedy series, and my agents loved it. And they said, "Oh, we set you up with somebody." And it was somebody that I had known from the Ladd Company at Warner Brothers, believe it or not. And And I went in there and told her the story, and she said, "Do you have 5 minutes more to stay with me?" And I went, "Yeah, sure." And she said, "I'm going to go get my boss." I don't want to say who her boss was, but it was one of like a brand name who ran HBO. He
Right.
walked in the room and I literally got dry mouth. I knew that name. I don't want to say who it was. And he said, "Tell it to me." And I took my 5 minutes, pitched it. He looked at me and he goes, "Do you have your agent's number on you?" And I said, this is how, I don't want to say naive, but this is how nervous I was. I turned to him and I said, "Did I do something wrong? Are you going to yell at me?" And he goes, and he looked at me and he got this huge grin and he said, "As a matter of fact, you didn't do something wrong. You just sold your pitch to us in the room." And
Wow.
I was shaking when I got to the car. I was like, that was back before cell phones. And I had to like go to
A
I had to go
payphone.
to a payphone and call my agent and go, "I just sold the pitch in the room." So, and
Which
and
do you still prefer writing plays to screenplays?
I love writing plays. I haven't been writing a lot of plays the last couple of years because they're really, really hard to do now. There's a whole system.
Well, they've
with
never been
theater.
easy to do,
They've
Marty.
never been easy to do. And theater, especially for older writers, which I am, it's easier to get your work done in the theater. There is definitely that, I guess somebody calls it the gray wall or whatever it is in film and television. It's, unless you're really famous, it's harder
Well,
to
if
get
you have
writing
not
jobs.
got your, if you've not got your hooks in by the time you're in your late 20s, early 30s, and if you get past your 40 or 45th birthday, it gets harder and harder. And
It's,
and
yeah.
you know what, this is not really a case of being gray or old. It has more to do, I think, with the fact that the people who are in charge of Hollywood tend to stay young, and the
Yes.
older people get moved out of Hollywood. So the people who are hiring you don't want to hire older people. They want to hire their friends.
Exactly. And my agent, not my agent, but my lawyer, my entertainment lawyer, when I was in my mid 30s and selling stuff, he said to me, we went to lunch one day and we were close friends. And he said, "We got to sell something. We got to get something made that makes you famous because," and he said these words to me. He said, "If you're not famous by the day you turn 40, I don't know what to tell you. It's not going to happen after that." And, it kind of ended up almost being true. I mean, I left to go work in Los Angeles because of a big giant musical, the musical of Paper Moon, which I wrote. And that didn't work out, but I still had some reputation. And then people started hiring me to write the books for musicals. And then I went back and started writing straight plays again in New York, and I had access there. I mean, I had access in LA with the theater company, and we would, rent theaters and things and do plays. But New York was ultimately where I wanted to be. And the disappointment of Paper Moon was supposed to have opened on Broadway. We were actually booked into a Broadway theater in 1993. There was a giant marquee at the Marquee Broadway theater with Paper Moon on it. And then there were the infamous, which I've come to learn are real things, creative differences. And the whole thing just exploded very, very publicly. But I still got hired.
You and I could have a very long story about creative differences.
We could indeed. I know you have that similar experience.
The last short-lived run of Jekyll and Hyde in 2013 was at the Marquee Theater.
Yes, I remember. Yeah. And I saw, yeah. Oh, I was thinking, you know what? I got mixed up with the Scarlet Pimpernell. That was famous too, because they had like 6 versions. In New York, it was
there were 3 openings.
Yeah. 3 different openings. And it was like Pimpernell 2.0 and Pimpernell 3.0. So, yeah. But I just discovered that because although Paper Moon wasn't done on Broadway, we went back and revised it, and a team of us went back and did it ourselves. And we got a production at one of the best regional theaters in the country, which was a Goodspeed Opera House up in Connecticut.
Very impressive.
Yeah. And Goodspeed did a joint production with Walnut Street in Philadelphia, which is also a fantastic, big regional theater. And Paper Moon got done a whole bunch after that, including it ran for 2 years. I'll make that very specific. It ran for 2 very long summers in Tokyo. and just was a sellout, and it was a huge success there. And then Paramount finally decided they were going to make a remake or something, and they pulled the rights from us. And that's another thing writers don't know about, a lot of them, when they're starting out, that especially in the theater, that rights, if you're doing an adaptation of something, are so difficult. They're difficult, they're costly, they're hard. And
unless you're in the public domain.
And that you would know about that.
I do know
believe.
about that.
You do know about that. Yeah. And more lately, I sort of tend to go toward either things that are in the public domain, or in the case of my play that's the best known, which is a play called The Irish Curse. I was in New York for about 2 years, and my life partner at the time, was a big actor on Broadway and very well known. And I got to know lots of people. And he made some remark one day while we were walking through the theater district about somebody that he knew, saying, "Oh, he has the Irish curse." And I said, "What, is he a drinker? Is he an alcoholic?" And I said, "No." And then he laughed and he blushed. And I said, "I don't know what that is." And he said, "Well, there's this thing about that we like New York, Philadelphia, Boston. It's called the Irish curse, and Irish American guys think they have small penises, and that's a real thing." And I said, I looked at him and I burst out laughing, and I said, "Wait, people honestly think this?" And he goes, "Yeah, they do." And that got implanted in my head, and I started Googling and found out, yes, indeed, it was a real idea. I have to always preface every talkback I do, every interview, I don't personally believe that's true, but the guys in the play believe it's true. So after a year's worth of research, lurking on websites and all sorts of things, and interviewing people, I sat down and I decided I'm going to write a play that's an hour and a half, 90 minutes. It's actual, in real time, a group therapy session for 5 guys who believe that they have this problem in their life and how it's affected every aspect of their life. And I know from along many years of writing by that point, it's always good. Like Mary Poppins was right. A spoonful of sugar does help the medicine go down. And that works for laughter too. And I knew that the way into this was going to have to be that it was funny. And I promised myself that, first of all, I took a piece of paper. I don't know what you do when you write, but I used to discover the themes I was writing about as I was writing the play. But in this case of this play, I thought, I'm writing a play about masculinity and what it means to be a man. And I actually put that on a huge piece of white paper and put it over my desk, over my computer. Mm-hmm. And I thought, this has to be funny, or no one's going to want to watch 5 guys whining and moaning and crying for an hour and a half. So the play I intended it to be funny, and it got the stamp of approval of how funny it was from the New York Times, which was the money quote that we got that helped it run off Broadway. It was originally done at the New York International Fringe Festival. It was a huge success there. We sold out 6 performances, like 2 days after the tickets went on sale. After we had the first preview, people went nuts, and it sold out the next morning. And it won one of the best play awards that year at the Fringe. And then it got optioned to be done off Broadway. Took 5 years to raise the money. And then it was done off Broadway, had a great run. Samuel French picked it up, and that was 11 years ago now. And it's been done all over the world in
how many languages?
8 different languages now.
8.
It's in Czech, Slovak, Portuguese. I can't think of the other ones offhand. But it's been.
All right. So that particular play has had a nice life. Well, of course, we're having this conversation in the time of COVID, and there are no real productions, except we were chatting a little earlier. What's going on right now to try and make productions like The Irish Curse continue on, even though we can't be in live theaters?
Well, Samuel French, which is now owned by Concord Theatricals, contacted my agent and I and said, "Hey, we're looking for small cast shows. There's 5 guys in Irish Curse, and that could be translated into virtual Zoom performances, not just taping it, but instinctually changing it. So I took a couple days and rewrote the play, very little, but just in terms of the setting and what was going on. And there is a virtual version of The Irish Curse available from Samuel French and Concord that basically has the five guys on a 5-way Zoom call for their meeting. And it's the same exact play. There's a couple little changes, and but otherwise, and they're hoping to get it out soon.
So this is an adaptive way of treating a piece of art in a time where you can't portray the art the way that it's intended to be portrayed.
Right. You can't see it in a theater. And one of the things about The Irish Curse that just makes everyone happy. Most of the theaters, I mean, one of the great joys of my life was it ended up being done in Slovakia, in Bratislava, and in Prague, in the Czech Republic, in Slovak and Czech. And they do things in rep there. They don't run the same play every night. They do things, and that way my play ran 5 years in Bratislava, in a huge, gorgeous 400-seat theater, the second biggest theater in the country, and with a cast of 5 huge television stars. When I got there to see the opening, I said, well, what would be comparable in New York? And she said, basically, if the cast of Mad Men were doing your play in New York,
wow,
that's the level of actors that we have doing it. And that was incredible that it lasted, but seeing it in live audiences, like even in different languages, was amazing, because the laughs are all in the exact same place. A lot of that was because I had say over the translations, and that's a whole other story I won't get into, but yeah. And as a matter of fact, the person who checked the translation, no pun intended, for the production in Prague said she actually thought the play was funnier in Czech, in the Czech language, than it was in English. So yeah.
And you don't speak Czech.
I don't speak Czech. No,
so when you saw the play, you understood what was going on.
I knew exactly where we were all the time. And as a matter of fact, well, I can tell you this little story. There's a section of the play where they make jokes about, there's a section that's all about spoofing the stereotyping of, let's just say, penis size and the country that people are from, or ethnicity. And it's very spoofy, and it's done to embarrass one of the characters in the play, and because of his stupid beliefs. And there's a reference to guys from Poland and Italy, as I believe in the play. They are not cursed, they're gifted, and there's a joke about that in the play. And so on opening night in Bratislava, where I'm watching it in Slovak, I know we're coming to that part of the play, and I'm going, wow, are they going to laugh at this? Because there are also jokes about guys from Eastern Europe in the play also being very gifted. And as a matter of fact, one of the things I discovered when I was in Bratislava, going on tours and checking out the city, apparently Bratislava has a reputation for like making gay porn. That's where it's a huge headquarters for gay porn, which I like, the guy on the bus told us that. And so I was expecting the audience not to react to that joke in the play. And I knew it was coming. And I was sitting next to the director, who was a doll, the guy who directed it, and spoke perfect English. And so I hear the words said by the character. I knew who was going to say them. He said, Polski e Italianski. And the audience roared, and then they applauded. And I turned to the director and I said, wait, you have that same stereotype about Polish guys and Italian guys? And the director leans over and whispers in my ear, the whole world has that stereotype about Polish guys and Italian guys. And at that moment I went, I had no idea when I'd written the play 5 years before, 10 years before actually, and it took that long to get done, that kind of universality was possible.
Marty, did you not know that men all over the world have the same equipment?
Yeah, no, I don't know what I knew when I wrote the play. All I knew was from lurking at websites and I didn't even know there was actually, later on, a guy came to the production off Broadway and said, he goes, did you write this play? And I thought he was going to slug me. And I said, yeah, I'm the writer. I hope it wasn't, you weren't offended or anything. And he said, are you serious? He goes, I laughed nonstop. And then I was sobbing at the end because the last 10 minutes are very powerful. And I said, well, it's nice to meet you. What brought you here? And he said, I run a group just like this at the Gay and Lesbian Center in New York City. And I froze. And he said, you didn't know about our group, did you? And I went, I had no idea about your group existed. I said, wow. And then later on, a couple of weeks later, somebody sent me an article, and I said, well, thank you so much for coming. He goes, are you kidding me? He said, I've already been texting the guys in the group. He said, we're going to buy tickets tomorrow. I'm bringing the whole group, all 10 of them.
There's nothing more magical than word of mouth.
I'm telling you.
Let's talk real briefly about your writing process. When you get an idea about how do you go about it? Do you come from plot or character, or where do you start?
I come from the land of, I come up with an idea, and then I come from the land. This is my wonderful mentor, Michael LaSalle, taught me this. Characters drive the story. Characters drive the action because they want something.
Mm-hmm.
That's what creates the action, and what pushes the story forward is when the antagonists stand in the way. And, and I usually think about a project. It usually takes me a year of thrashing around, and I'll take notes or I'll do research. Like I lurked for the curse, and other things. I do extensive research. And then, Steve, the way it works, and it's always worked this way, I get a visual image in my head, usually when I wake up or I'm taking a shower. I will see the opening in the play. And then I know it's time. The baby it's like the water breaking, I know it's time for the baby to be delivered. And then I will usually go into my room to my computer, or sometimes I'll write in longhand, and then I will just write. And usually the first draft, if it's going well, the first draft will be less than a month. I'll have the whole thing. And I pare it down as I write. I'll write 3 or 4 pages every day, and then I'll start the next day by revising them and editing them and cutting things. And then I'll always get to a point. I always break off writing at a point where I know exactly what's going to happen next. And
you're talking about per day.
Per day, yeah. I'll finish a day going, oh, this happens now, and so that way I can stop without worrying about, getting up the next morning and go, oh, where do we start? Yeah.
And how many drafts do you typically do before you're ready to show it to somebody?
I do drafts as I write, as I go along. I'm constantly rewriting. And then when I've got the whole thing, then there's usually another week or 2. Sometimes I'll put it aside for a while. And then I will usually do a minimum of 2 to 3 more drafts, and then I'll show it to somebody. Usually somebody who I trust. And often there's 2 or 3 directors that I work with a lot, and I'll send it to one of them usually and go, what do you think?
Are you used to working with dramaturgs, or they rarely come in?
No. When I started writing my plays and working with our theater company, I had 3 of my plays produced by the theater company. The idea of, and I grew up reading Tennessee Williams and Lanford Wilson and Eugene O'Neill, and the dramaturgs didn't exist then. You wrote the play, and then you went and you didn't workshop plays for 5 years like they do now. It's one of the reasons that so many times you'll see a play and it feels so overworked and hitting all of the right marks. And they've often with plays, they've just workshopped all of the passion out of it. That's just my personal opinion. So the first time I think
you're right.
The first time I had to work with a dramaturg was a play that Roger and I wrote called Desert Fire. That was about the atomic vets that Peg Yorkins, what was it called? LA Free Theater, Shakespeare Festival.
I saw that at the Coronet.
Yeah.
In LA.
And we literally worked with a dramaturg who was a wonderful person, and she did great work. But after a while, it was so schematic. Like there were graphs and charts, and I was like, my writer brain doesn't work like that. It's interesting because all these years later, I am a structure fanatic. Like, especially if I'm writing with someone else, or if it's the book for a musical, structure is everything.
Everything.
It's everything.
It's what you're trying to build the house on.
Absolutely. And for anybody out there listening who writes the books for musicals, or writes musicals, period, or wants to write musicals, there's lots of great books about musicals. My favorite personal book about musical construction and writing a musical was written by Jack Viertel. I forget the title of it, but Jack Viertel was a theater critic in LA.
Yes, I've read it, and I can't remember the title either. An American Musical or something like that.
Something like that, yeah. And he breaks it down into what each kind of song is, and how it moves the plot, and how it reveals character. But it's incredibly structured.
I think I've written one that's not too bad.
Yes, Beating Broadway. Well, you have a lot of experience with that, so
I do. It is musicals, more than most straight plays, although straight plays do it too. Musicals are more aligned in terms of the way that they're structured with movies, feature
Absolutely.
films, than
Yes.
they are necessarily with plays.
Yes.
And they have to be structured. They have to move forward like a shark. If you try to diverge or just spin your wheels talking about something endlessly, that musical is going to die on the vine. It has to move forward, and it has to be structured right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, musicals are just all about structure.
And you've got to hit the right moment for your intermission, basically, or they're not coming back after it.
Exactly.
If you don't hit the right mark.
It's that same thing that they tell you about writing movies, which is you've got to grab, and Lucas and Spielberg nailed that door shut with between Jaws and between Raiders, the shark eating the girl and the rolling ball.
Yeah.
Which is, you've got to grab them. It used to be, when I started writing films, you used to have 10 minutes in which to grab them. And now I'm told, the last couple times I went to pitch meetings, that you got to grab them within, you got like less than 5 minutes to grab them.
You've got to grab them on page 1, 2, 3, or you're in trouble.
Or you lose them. Yeah. And we see that now. You see that on they've codified that with cold openings on television. You get that cold open, Dick Wolf is a genius at that.
So if I said to you can only write straight plays or musicals for the rest of your life, which would you prefer?
I would write straight plays.
Straight plays.
Musicals break your heart. I mean, you and I can commiserate over that. Musicals will break your heart.
But if you're lucky, they can make you a lot of money too.
They can make, the famous expression, I forget who said it, but you can make a killing, but you can't make a living.
Yeah, you can't. That's right. You can't make a living, but you can make a killing. That's exactly.
Tony Kushner gave an interview once, and he said, "Yes, I wrote Angels in America and several other wonderful plays, and won Tonys and Pulitzers. And if Steven Spielberg hadn't continually kept hiring me to write the screenplays of Munich and Lincoln and Mike Nichols letting him do the adaptation of Angels," he said, "I would not," I believe he put it very eloquently. He said, "I would not be able to live in the style of which I am accustomed if it was just based on my royalties. But if you write Wicked," I'm missing her name in my head right now, the woman who wrote the book for Wicked.
Winnie Holtzman.
Winnie Holtzman. If you're Winnie Holtzman and you wrote Wicked, or the guys who wrote Les Mis, or any of those shows, neither you nor 20 generations after you ever has to lift a finger, in the immortal words of
Tim Rice, Lerner and Lowe, Rodgers and Hammerstein, any of those folks. Yeah, you can make an absolute killing, but that's like hitting the lotto. There aren't that many people that get
it. It is literally the lottery, and there are so many steps along the way. And I mean, all those stories that came out of Seattle when they were taking Wicked out of town were like, by the end, no one was speaking to anybody. and 3 different people have claimed credit, 2 of whom who had nothing publicly to do with the play, at the musical, and said, "Oh, I'm the one who came up with the fact that we focused the musical on the relationship with the women, because that is the thing that makes Wicked work. I've taken my nieces when they were 12 and 14 twice to see Wicked, and they went crazy, because it's about girl power, to use a phrase, and it's about how women band together who can hate each other at the beginning and love each other and be their best friend at the end."
I believe Wicked is the first musical to actually earn $1 billion in a single theater.
Yes, I believe you're right.
which is
And
just off the chain. No
and
play gets there.
no, and I mean, I remember sitting down one day going, okay, and I adore Winnie Holtzman, and her work. I don't know her personally. Everybody I know who knows her loves her, and I was a huge fan of, was it My So-Called Life or whatever,
I
the
think
TV
so.
series that she did, and I actually love Wicked. I just love it, and I sat down one day and went, okay, so the New York production, the London production, the Tokyo production, there was that period when it was just literally everywhere. And there were 2 first-class national tours. And I remember turning to a buddy of mine and going, somebody somewhere is making like $500,000 a week from that play for a year, year.
Or if
And
you're Lin-Manuel Miranda and write the book, music,
exactly.
and lyrics.
And lyrics for Hamilton.
For Hamilton, the amount of money being earned is just insane.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely.
It's way bigger than any kind of money you can earn as a writer of movies.
Yeah,
Way
I think
bigger.
that's true. Way bigger. I mean, the closest you can probably get is if you're one of those showrunners that's making.
Well,
But
TV,
even then,
TV's different. But
TV
even
people
then,
make a lot more. But even then, you can't. I don't think you could make being Vince Gilligan or David Simon or Matt Weiner. I don't think you could make a year that much money. That probably what Lin-Manuel Miranda could make in 1 year from Hamilton.
That's right.
But that's just the lottery, Steve. That's the exact word that you used, and that is exactly a way to describe it.
Yep, it's more luck than anything else. Though, of course, the goods have to be there. It's not like
exactly, and it has to do with this. It has to do with the zeitgeist. It has to do with, because I was one of those people, and I loved In the Heights. I think In the Heights is wonderful too, and I remember when I read that announcement about Hamilton, and it's like, you're honest to God making the musical about the Secretary of the Treasury in 1881 or 1801. I'm like, and then I was very lucky. A buddy of mine invested in that show. And when it was at the Public, it was the second preview. And he called me one morning and he said, he was funny. He goes, my husband's out of town and I have investor tickets tonight. I know, he'd been a fan. He tried to produce one of my plays. And he said, do you want to come with me? And he said, I'll take you to dinner at the library at the Public. And I was in Jersey City at the time. And he goes, and I'll come pick you up in the car. And I was like, great. And I turned to him at intermission and he was literally shaking, going, do you like it? Do you like it? What do you think? And I just remember looking at him going, musical theater will never be the same. And he went, are you serious? And I said, I can't speak right now. And by the end of it, I remember saying to him, I said, I'm going to predict, he laughs because he backs me up on this. When we were riding home back to Jersey City in the car, he said, what do you think is the critics are going to say? And I said, I guarantee you that at least one of them will say, there are 2 revolutions going on in the public theater that's doing Hamilton. One of them is the American Revolution, and the other one is a revolution in the musical theater, and things will never be the same. And I think I remember when the Ben Brantley review came out, and my friend called me and he goes, he said almost those words. And I went, it was so obvious to anybody that loves theater and loves musical theater.
And we could have a long conversation about this, but I'm going to take exception to one part of that.
Yes.
And that is this. I think it has changed musical theater, probably ineradicably forever. But at the same time, I think very, very few people are going to come close to duplicating what just happened there, because you can't do rap show after rap show after rap show.
You can't.
And so you're going to continue to have traditional musicals sort of push the envelope in different ways, but not Hamilton over and over again, because it'll get old fast.
Yeah. And you know what, Steve? I have a godson who, when Hamilton came out, he was 15. He was in high school. Every single kid in that play production class at high school knew every single word of Hamilton.
Sure.
I took my godson to see it when it was in San Francisco. I said, you can't sing along in the theater, but he sang the entire score in the car driving up the peninsula into downtown San Francisco. And you know what? I had friends when I was in high school that could sing the entire score to Company.
Sure.
That was the whole drama department. They could sing the entire score to A Little Night Music. And
Sure.
then 10 years later, I had theater friends that could sing the whole score of Evita for you. at the drop of a hat. So
or Sweeney Todd.
Or Sweeney Todd. That's my personal favorite. But
that's
and
my
I
personal
know,
favorite.
Yeah, Sweeney Todd's that's one of my top five.
It's the greatest musical that's ever been written for my money.
My only challenge to that would be Gypsy, and what do they have in common? But
same lyricist.
Yeah, I think so. But those are two of my favorites. Somebody asked me once my top five, and those were two of my favorites. But my personal favorite, the thing that always moves me the most, is I just Sunday in the Park with George, to me, is just I can't get through it without sobbing every single time.
That's the artist in you.
Yeah, that's it. I mean,
and you understand what it takes to make it dot by dot,
dot by dot, and the greatest thing ever in the history. Well, there's two lines in that. Everything you do, let it come from you. Then it will be new. Give us more to see. And then when he says, look, I made a hat where there never was a hat. And you just go, okay, that's it. That's why I do this. That's why I've been doing this since I was 11 years old. So,
well, that is a great moment to transition toward the end of this episode. This has just been a fantastic, fun, story-filled episode with Marty Casella here today, one of today's really great playwrights. You should check out his plays at Samuel French, which is now owned by Concord. Is that what you said?
Concord Theatricals. Yeah. Okay.
And so I'm just curious, through all your experiences, and there have been many, you've been around a few years now. You've met and worked with lots of different folks in the entertainment industry. You've had lots of experiences. Can you share with us one or more stories that's, quirky, offbeat, oddball, weird, strange, or maybe just plain funny?
I can. It is all of those things. In the 1990s, the mid and late 1990s, I had been hired to adapt a really wonderful book called The Easy Way Out by a wonderful novelist. Stephen, I'll get it. It's very Irish. And the director who signed on to it after he read my first draft was Herbert Ross, the well-known director who directed tons of movies. I mean,
sure.
and I mean, it just California Suite and everything, The Goodbye Girl, and he would give me notes, and let's just say that the plot of this novel was sort of very similar to what I was going through in my own personal life at the time, and he kept saying to me, because we'd talk about life, and I got to meet his wife. It was like, what's Princess Lee Radziwill, whatever. She'd kind of waft through the room sometimes and with perfume, and he'd go, and he finally one day, he just started yelling at me. It was like Christmas Eve, and the two of them were leaving for Paris. There was literally stacks of luggage in the entryway to their entire floor through on East 72nd Street or 81st, I forget. And he finally, and like a maid would bring tea, and it was Steve. It was just unreal. And all of a sudden, he just started yelling at me, and he said, "Why can't you solve this? Why can't you fix this and make it better?" He said, "I know you can do it. I read your other scripts." He said, "The story's there, the characters are there. The tone is off. What's the problem? This is about a guy who can't commit to his partner. This is about a guy who sleeps on the floor in their bedroom because he can't sleep in the same bed because he's too afraid to commit." And he looked at me and he goes, "You told me you had that same problem." And he's screaming this in this beautiful apartment going, "Why can't you write this damn script?" And I was like shaking, and I'm like looking down, and I'm like, that's really unfair to bring my personal life. He goes, "No, you're an artist. You have to bring your personal life into it." And he goes, "My wife and I have to go to Paris. Merry Christmas." He threw me out of the apartment. So I took 2 weeks, and I did it. I went back and I just went, yes, I do sleep on the floor of our bed because I can't commit. And I went, wow, the character in the play does that too. Holy cow. Or in the novel, holy cow. Okay. And I went back and I just did that thing where they tell you to like, not only write what you know, but like just rip your heart out. And I did it. And I poured it all into the script. And then 2 weeks later, Mr. Ross, he was a tough guy, but he was wonderful. And he called me and he said, do you have that draft? Did you do it? And I said, yes, sir. I think this was he wanted a hard copy. And I said, I'll drop one off with your doorman later this afternoon. So I went up there and dropped it off. And my phone rang like 3 days later, my cell phone rang. And he said, what did you do? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, this is exactly what I wanted. He said, whatever you did, you literally put your soul into this script. He said, he blew me away. He said, I've already called Matthew Broderick and I'm going to send him the script. He said, and I've already been on the phone to Whoopi because she can play the female lead. And I didn't know what to say. He said, you did it. He said, that's what you have to do sometimes. He said, I'm sorry I yelled at you. Like on Christmas Eve, I'm sorry I yelled at you. and unfortunately, the tragic part of this is he died soon after that. He had I think he had a heart attack. And the movie just, as we all know, as happens, the movie just was dead in the water.
You lost your champion.
I did. Like you said at the very beginning, it just takes one person. It just takes one person. And that's, you know.
And unfortunately, sometimes if that one person steps away from a company or dies like that, that no one else wants to touch whatever their thing was. So so the project also then goes away.
Right. And the one other story, which I'll be real short, and when we were doing Raiders, we were in Africa and I didn't get to live in the big fancy hotel because I was the assistant and I had to live in this tiny, we called it the Midnight Express Hotel with the, the bleak light bulb and the bed with just no mattress and springs. It was horrifying. And I was 25 miles away through the Tunisian desert because they had me at the other place because I had to be the first one up to drive people to the anyway. And I had to be the last one to the hotel because I had to put the call sheets under the doors. It's before electronic call sheets. And I got really, really sick. Despite everything, the shots, the not eating the food, I got really, really sick. I jumped into a pool one Sunday and I accidentally swallowed water and apparently they hadn't put chlorine in the pool. So I was very, very ill and I was hallucinating and I was in this awful, awful, awful hotel room, hallucinating and making phone calls to my family in the United States going, I think I'm dying. At which point my mother called Lucasfilm and said, my son just called me and said he's dying. Can somebody send a doctor there, please? And I finally, they took really good care of me. The nurse and the doctor came twice a day and I finally got better. And at that point, I went back to the big fancy resort hotel and there had been a note left for me. And Steven said, I want you to come have lunch with me and we're going to talk. And I was like, oh my God, they're going to fire me. Oh my God, they're going to send me back. I'm going to live in ignominy for the rest of my life. And we sat down and he took my hand and he said, do you know how sick you were? And I said, well, I know I was hallucinating and I didn't know who I was for 2 days. And he said, I was hours away from hiring a private jet. I'm sorry, I'm choking up telling you this. He said, we were about 3 hours away from hiring a private jet to fly you to London. That's how sick you were.
Wow.
To a hospital. He said, you're coming here with us. He said, you're having a room right down the hall from me. You're going to be in the fancy suite and we're going to go real slow for the next couple of weeks. You don't have to go to location. He said, you're the reason I'm getting this movie made. Because I had to pack the food. I took care of everything for him so he wouldn't get sick. He had everything he ever wanted. I was his assistant and Kathy was his associate. And he said, you're the reason I'm here. You're the reason I'm able to get this movie made because of you. So don't get sick again. All right. And he squeezed my hand and I just and that to me, yeah, it was great to sell stuff in a room. It's great to get applause. It's great to win awards, but not only, I mean, come on, at that point, he was the most famous movie director probably in the world.
Probably still is.
And still is. And the fact he said that to me, I told somebody once I would walk in front of a car to save that man's life. And that's the thing that we always don't get in our business, whether it's plays or TV or film writing. And that kind of loyalty and that kind of depth of emotion and that kind of commitment. And So it doesn't surprise me that he did that thing when he made that arrangement so that I would be there and get told that I got the job in the movie. He did, when he said that to me that day, and afterwards, he always made sure I was okay. And if I got tired, because it lasted. I had dysentery and 7 other horrible things, and he would always make sure that I got sent back to the hotel if I wasn't feeling well. And,
Well, isn't that the way a boss is supposed to be? And
that's the way. Yes.
And how rare that is, because most bosses won't do that kind of thing.
They won't. And I learned that from him. So every show I've ever worked on, if I'm in any kind of position of power, or as the writer is a lot in the theater, when I've been involved in producing my own stuff, or, being one of the producers, I make sure everybody's treated really, really well. And I sort of always knew that, but Stephen taught me that. And I can't, that changed my life that day when he said those words to me. So that's not weird or anything, but that's like a story to I hope, inspire people to treat people well and treat your collaborators well. And when you hook it up with the Herb Ross story, there's sometimes in writing situations, and when you're doing art of any kind, there's sometimes when you do have to yell at people. You do have to stand up in a meeting. Once in a production meeting for one of my plays, somebody was behaving appallingly, somebody that I knew really well and loved, that was a member of a team, and I had to stand up, and I had to tell her to be quiet, to stop talking, and that she was never, ever, ever, ever allowed again to talk to any individual that was in my presence like that again with me if I was in the room, or I would have her fired. And I said, you cannot treat human beings like that, because this industry, by its nature, whether it's film or television or theater, it's hard. It's really, really hard. And it's cutthroat, and it's bitter, and you're only as good as your last, what is it though? The line from Sunset Boulevard or whatever, you're only as good as your last picture. And that's what I like to think that's important, is that decency and kindness and humanity. And I learned that from, I call him Mr. Spielberg now, so people don't go, you name dropper. So there you go.
I think that's an extraordinary couple of stories there, and especially instructive for those that are coming up in the business to treat others with respect and decency and humanity, and not treat them like garbage or crap that they can just throw away.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, last question for you, Marty, because that you kind of got my guts on that. Last question for you. Do you have a solid piece of advice or a tip? Not that we haven't heard many of them today, for those who are maybe just starting out, or maybe they're in the industry a little bit and trying to get to that next level.
Yeah. First, I have 2 pieces of advice. Like, if you're young, you're just out of college, whatever, always keep in contact. It's so much easier now with social media. Stay in contact with all those people that you went to college with. Stay in contact with the people you went to high school with if you can. Like, keep those relationships. This business is built on relationships. You have to have the talent, but a lot of it's relationships. And I'm constantly like making referrals for people or writing people letters of recommendation. It goes both ways. Do that. Once again, that's the humanity part of it. And the other thing is, I wrote this down and I'll read it to you. It's like, keep working, keep putting your stuff out there, and never forget that everything you do is going to lead to something else. Often it never happens the way you think it's going to happen, but it will open another door. After I finished writing The Irish Curse, because of the subject matter and what it's about, I put it in a drawer and thought, I can't show this to anybody ever. Oh my God, no one's ever going to do this. And then when I put together a reading of it, the guy that I'd worked with, the director, he just turned to me and he said, literally at the end of the conversation, he turned to me at the end of the last line of the play and he went, when do we start? And I mean, that was a play I wouldn't take out of a drawer for 6 months. So you never know. You just never know who's going to call you. You never know if, like with Irish Curse in Prague, some guy in Prague has an inn at Samuel French. He's Czech, and he he makes his living from translating American and British plays into Czech. So I had no idea. I never went after that. You can make all the 5-year plans you want, but you have to go into this knowing that there's always that X factor. There's something out there that's going to work but you have to do all the work in advance.
It is always good to do the work and to have that plan, but you have to leave your world open to the possibility that other things are going to come in to you.
Yes.
And if you don't, you'll shut them out, and then you've got a problem.
Yeah. One of my plays that I absolutely love that won awards, and I couldn't get it done anywhere. And one day I picked up the phone, and it was this young actress, producer, and she said, "You're not going to believe this, but I went to an agent's office a couple of days ago, and to talk to them about something, and he went to go take a phone call in another room, and I saw a script on the desk, and I was anxious and nervous and bored all at the same time." She said, "So I picked it up and started reading it." She said, "It was your play. It was a play of mine called Situate." And she said, I want to produce it off Broadway. Can you and I get together and have lunch?" And I went, "You took a script off an agent's desk?" And she goes, "Yeah." And that's how it works.
That is how it works. It is how it works.
That's how it works.
It's John Milius saying, come to my office.
Come to my, and I wouldn't go to the play the night before because I thought he was going to punch me because I had portrayed him in the play, and he thought it was Spielberg that I was portraying. And it was John. And that's why, John said, what did you do last night if you were afraid? I said, "John, I was actually literally hiding under my bed, afraid last night you were going to come hunt me down." He goes, and he said to me, "That was the best portrayal of Stephen I've ever seen." And I went, "Okay, believe that if you want." But
does he know now that it's his?
No, he never.
Well, I'm going to guess he's not likely to listen to this, but you never know.
You never know. You do never know. You never know who's going to listen to something or who's going to pick a script up off a desk.
I had to learn the lesson at least 25 times the hard way that you don't burn bridges. If you burn bridges, it's a real problem. And I burned a few early in my career and then never come back. And it's a problem. It's a real, you have to not burn bridges no matter how bad things get.
Yeah. And
you have to leave yourself open to those new possibilities at all times.
You do. And it's, boy, when you're young and someone hurts your pride or your vanity and they do it publicly, there's very few things I don't like to regret things, but one regret I have is something very public happened to me and I didn't respond back publicly, like through a publicist or anything, but I wrote the person a note, and that person was one of the most powerful people in New York City theater. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know better and I didn't have anybody to stop me. And I basically got blackballed for a couple of years after that because, and then later I ran into him at a giant fundraiser, and he and his wife were absolutely lovely to me. And I was lovely back to them, and we shook hands. And after that, I think like, oh, some doors started opening again. Uh-huh. So you never know, so it's just follow those rules again. Be kind to people, be generous, to swallow your pride sometimes when you have to, and be a good person. And
well, Marty Casella, this has been an exceptional hour and 20 plus minutes.
Oh gosh, sorry, Steve.
Oh no, it's been great. This has been so many fun stories and you've had such a great career and such a great life's living. You've been living your life in a very commendable way. And, I'm just delighted that you came on StoryBeat to spend some time with me today.
Thanks, Steve. This has been an utter pleasure. Thank you for asking me. And thank you for all those years ago, making beautiful lights and being a good friend. And so there, yeah.
Well,
and for the things you've done, and I'm going to tell you this. As soon as we hang up from this, I'm going to go on whatever it is where I order my books. And tell me the name of
it's called Beating musical. Broadway.
Beating Broadway. Okay, good. That's
how to create stories for musicals that get standing ovations. That's the subtitle.
Okay. Subtitles are always good. Mm-hmm. So it'll be my Amazon delivery tomorrow. So well, there we go. And
well, I appreciate that. And again, thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure.
And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great Story Beat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.